Thank you, Dr. Omar. Thank you, Dr. Omar, for your paper. It's refreshing to have a Muslim scholar give a commentary on Christian scripture, and it goes well for interfaith. I call upon Father Ricardo Smuts to respond. He is the ordained priest in the Catholic Church. He completed his MA in Biblical Studies in Rome. He is a staff member and Dean of Students in the St. Francis Xavier Catholic Seminary in Cape Town, that is in Crawford, where I stay, where he teaches Old and New Testament, Greek and Hebrew. Father Smuts.
In his intervention, Dr. Omar limited himself to verse 2 of chapter 13 of the Epistle to the Hebrews. But I would like to include verse 1 as well. And the translation from the Greek reads as follows: "Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect hospitality, for through it some have unknowingly entertained angels." The Christian scriptural quotation that forms the basis of Dr. Omar's intervention from the Epistle to the Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 2, comes from the final chapter of that epistle. The epistle is unique in the New Testament in that its literary genre is distinct and different from any of the other New Testament writings. It is widely recognized to be that of a sermon, and more specifically, an exhortation. In point of fact, verse 2 forms part of a greater section, namely Hebrews 13, 1 to 17, and is the final exhortations of the epistle to living an authentic Christian life. The fact that by genre, the epistle is a sermon, and a priestly sermon at that, the purpose and intention of the author is principally to exhort, encourage his readers to live an authentic life as attested to by the witness and sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Now, verse 2 is part of a subsection, namely from chapter 13, verses 1 to 6, that deals with exhortations concerning community life, family life, and even personal conduct. Verses 1 and 2 at the beginning of chapter 13 contains a double exhortation to brotherly conduct, namely brotherly love, which I have translated as mutual love from the Greek Philadelphia, and hospitality, Philoxenia. What needs to be understood as, aside from its occurrences here, Philoxenia occurs 6 other times in the New Testament. In difference from the usage outside early Christian literature, the word in New Testament texts is always used metaphorically for love towards brothers and sisters in the faith, though not limited exclusively to one's own faith tradition. In Greek literature, this usage is practically unknown, and the word is understood as love of physical brothers and sisters. Our author, however, becomes concrete right away and illustrates this attitude towards fellow Christians by readiness to receive one's neighbors in one's homes. The ideal of hospitality was widespread in antiquity. By hospitality, the alien becomes part of one's world, and importantly, ceases to be a menace. This has enormous and practical consequences in its application for our own and immediate context. For the first generations of Christians, hospitality was particularly needed in receiving missionaries and offering refuge for migrants. The reason given by our author for the benediction connected with hospitality is taken from the book of Genesis, chapter 18, which Dr. Omar rightly refers to the example of the patriarch Abraham, who received the 3 visitors and recognized in them as being the angel of the Lord. In the translation that Dr. Omar used and I myself translated, we translated the last part of verse 2 of chapter 13 as, "For through it some have unknowingly entertained angels." Now, the Greek word xenisantes, entertain, here may be misleading. Abraham, in chapter 18 of the book of Genesis, gives generous hospitality to angelic visitors and found an unexpected, unlooked-for dividend in receiving through his guests the divine promise of the birth of his son Isaac. The following should not be lost on the reader, that a needy guest, the author implies, may be something and someone more in God's eyes. Hence, the opportunity should not be missed. Now, the xenophobic attacks which erupted in South Africa in May of this year are without doubt symptoms of deep-seated problems prevalent in the country, which Dr. Omar alluded to. While it is clear that the attacks against foreigners were the symptoms of these deep-seated problems in our society, the scapegoating of our fellow Africans for these stresses and the unleashing of an orgy of violence and plunder that was deliberately orchestrated against them was both egregiously wrong and shameful. The swift and universal condemnation of these deplorable attacks from all sectors within the mainstream of society, with the major role players realizing the impact of this on our country as a whole and the perception of our country throughout the continent and the world itself, and the humanitarian outreach which followed in the wake of this social tragedy, revealed that many concerned South Africans were not prepared to be tainted by the scourge of xenophobia and the indiscriminate actions of a few. The texts from the letter to the Hebrews and the book of Genesis that were quoted by Dr. Omar in his paper are without a doubt a challenge in that they exhort us to rediscover the original and at that the etymological sense of the meaning of Philadelphia and Philoxenia, their respective meanings from antiquity, as a direct and authentic response to the deplorable xenophobic attacks. The response calls for a moral imperative and the conversion from xenophobia to Philoxenia that will be catalysts in the development of individuals who collectively make us to be the rainbow people of God and the building up of our moral fiber. Consequentially, Dr. Omar is perfectly correct in his analysis that there needs to be a rediscovery of the revelation and the truths found in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures and the Islamic scriptures if we as South Africans desire to authentically live the philosophy of Ubuntu, which echoes the virtue of Philoxenia. The role of religion is indispensable in this regard. For in trying to overcome the simplistic logic of the power of force and replace it with the power of law and the collective wisdom of peoples, we must become authentic builders of peace. In this demanding task, individual believers and communities of believers have their place and their individual roles to play. Religions, despite the weaknesses and contradictions